Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Shay. I wanted to come on and kind of give some further thoughts on our conversations from this past weekend. There was a few questions that I continued to think about that I wanted to revisit, kind of see, because sometimes you answer questions in the moment, and then you think about them later, like, I think I could have answered that differently, or I could have added more background to that, or man, I was wrong about that, and I need to go back and revisit it. That's what I wanted to do today, is just kind of touch base on a few of the questions that we had. And obviously, if there was other stuff that came about that you guys want me to touch base on, just let me know and we'll go back through it. No problem. The first one that I was thinking through, somebody asked, so did Adam and Eve really understand what it was that God was presenting before them? So I think the question kind of went like, so if God said, in the day that you eat it, you will surely die, did Adam and Eve really know what that meant? Or was that just like, okay, like you're saying words and I don't understand what they mean? I'll say this, and I think I answered this way on Sunday, but I just want to give just some further thought to it. And there was different views behind it, but I think whichever view you come to, Adam and Eve had to have had some kind of knowledge of what God was understanding for that threat to continue on, right? Because we'll see in Genesis chapter 3, it's not like when Eve is communicating to the serpent, it's not like she says, "Oh, God said these words and I didn't really understand them." I think they fully understood what it meant when God said, "In the day that you eat it, you will surely die." And I think there's different reasons for that. One, I think sometimes we have this thought that the further away that we get from Adam and Eve, the smarter humankind is becoming. I don't think that way. I actually think that if God directly made Adam and Eve as the first humans and he looked at them and said, "This is very good," he would have created them, in my eyes, highly intelligent, like ultra intelligent, understanding. God is walking with them. God is living them amongst them. There's no separation between them and God. I think they would have had like a man, like an explosion of knowledge. And I think the further away we get from Adam and Eve, actually, I don't want to say we're becoming more dumb, but we're not. We're not. We don't have the wisdom that God imputed into Adam and Eve. And the further we get away from that, we're losing that over time. The things we rely upon, yeah, we might be getting smaller technologically. We might have some alternative understandings of like science and all kind of other stuff, but it's not that wisdom from God. Like death has reigned this whole time, and death is degenerative. So to me, it would make sense, since death is degenerative, that our knowledge would degenerate over time also. That would be my argument to that. Those first people really understood what was going on. Another thing that we talked about on Sunday, what's up with the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? And I think I said something like, I think those trees were, it's not as if those trees were giving life or were giving the knowledge of good and evil. And I think I just want to say that a little bit differently, or maybe add some context to my thoughts on that. And it's almost gonna it almost feels like I need to retract some of what I said on Sunday, because I do actually think the tree of life, there was something about the tree of life that God utilized to extend the life of people. And the reason I say that, when we come to Genesis chapter 3, like after the fall, and God has to remove them from the garden, this is verse 22. He says, "Then the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also the tree of life and eat it and live forever. Therefore, the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden Yet God kicked him out of the garden because he was saying, like, now that he has this knowledge of good and evil, now we need to set up a system where he can't have access to the tree of life. There was something physically life giving about this tree of life that would have allowed them to live forever. I think on Sunday I said something opposite than that, so I would repent and say I was wrong in how I presented that, right? I would still stand by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I don't know if the partaking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was what determined whether they had the knowledge of good and evil. I think they fully understood because they were walking with God. Again, they were highly intelligent because they're the first people made by God. They would have had like an ultra intelligence, not only like knowledge wise, but experience wise too. So a lot of the times, and I wish I had said this on Sunday, a lot of the times when the word know, K-N-O-W, is used, it's not talking about like a heady knowledge. And I think a lot of times, because we're going English to other languages, it doesn't always translate how things are meant in the text. And so we have to do some deeper digging. As you do some deeper digging, the same word know that's used in the knowledge of good and evil is the same word when we come later and when it would say something like Adam knew his wife and bore a son. Obviously, biologically, that verse is not saying that Adam gained a physical or a mental knowledge of his wife and out popped a baby. That's not the way that works, right? When it says he knew her, there's an intimacy there. There's an experiential thing. I think somebody said on Sunday. They said it better than I did on Sunday. There's an experience thing, and so Adam and Eve, as they approach that tree of knowledge of good and evil, just because two trees are there doesn't mean they function the same, right? That tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the way it functioned, was in some kind of way you would understand what good and evil was outside of God's perspective. The only thing Adam and Eve knew at the time was God's perspective on things. It's how God saw them. He was the arbiter of what was right and what was wrong, and they took him at his word. Now that they've partaken of the knowledge, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, I don't think they gained anything. I think what they gained was an experiential perspective that rivaled God's. And so they acquired a truth or a knowledge, if you will, that was outside of God's perspective. And that was the rebellion. And that's what Satan was saying, right? He knows you're not going to die. You're just going to be like him. He knows you're just going to be like him. That's why he's trying to keep you from it, because he doesn't want a rival. And yes, no, that's one of those things where Satan is crafty, right? And that's how it says that he was a crafty enemy. Because yes, God doesn't want us to be his rivals, but that's not a bad thing. Satan presented it as, or the serpent, I'll be specific. The serpent presented it as something that was like, God is hiding away something. He's hiding away a knowledge from you. And when you partake of the tree, it's going to give you that knowledge. It's a lie hidden within the truth, I feel like. It's motive. It's the motive that was hidden, right? And we see Satan, the serpent, doing that to Adam and Eve. So that was my thoughts on that. Hopefully it's not confusing on those two. Here's my last one. And this one's a little bit deeper, right? Did death exist before the fall? Was death a part of God's creation prior to Adam and Eve's rebellion? Y'all, this was a deep dive, and I've been I kind of need to come up for air a little bit. I'm sure I could go deeper, but the more I listen to different people's perspective, the more sure I am on my perspective and my position on it. So I just want to present it how I have it. And obviously this is one of those things that I'm going to hold loose handed, but at the same time, I'm thoroughly convinced, and this is how I'm going to teach it. And so if we need to do some back and forth, I'm comfortable with that. I can show you more. We can have more dialogue. This is just how I'm going to teach it. And I think this is a fair rendering as we look at the totality of the Bible, right? We have two views of how we can go with this. We can go, and really it goes back to our Genesis 1 conversation, young earth, old earth kind of conversation. Did death exist prior to the fall? If I were to take up an old earth position, I would say yes. Death existed before the fall, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because some kind of animal death would have been a part of God's creation, because animals are there, right? And like sharks are specifically designed to be like efficient killing machines. Orcas, right? Different animals, like there's certain serpents that have like a killing gland, like they inject a small amount of venom, and it's very efficient, right? Like why would they wouldn't believe in a second creation? A person who holds to old earth, it wouldn't be like a second creation of things. God created his creation with death within its purview. Like death has always kind of been there. A young earth creationist would say something like, well, no, the Bible seems like it communicates that death was not a part of God's created design. We could see a world pre-death, and we can see the Bible communicating a world post-death. I mean, I'm sorry. I said that right. Post-death. So pre-death was in the garden. We saw Adam and Eve living, however long that was. To me, it goes back to another reason why the whole like is a day mean a day in Genesis 1. So we see the world pre that death, and then in Revelation we see an eternity where death doesn't exist anymore. And so for the young earth, the person who holds to a young earth creation idea would say that death is not eternal, and it's not a part of God's design. Life is a part of God's design, and death is it's a marring of life. Like it's a tainting of life. It's a separation from God. Separation from God. It's not annihilation. It's just ruin, right? It's a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so those are the two views on how it comes down to. Like on one side, if you believe the old earth, death was there prior to creation. And I think somebody said this on Sunday, who's to say that outside of the Garden of Eden, because obviously there were some boundaries to the Garden of Eden, outside of the Garden of Eden, who's to say that death didn't exist out there? And so when God says to Adam and Eve, in the day that you eat that, you will surely die, God was essentially pointing out to who was outside, to the world outside of the Garden of Eden, and saying, see, if you rebel against me, that's what your life is going to look like. And he was able to look toward the animals tearing each other apart, or animals' bones lying in the dirt, that kind of thing. From a young earth perspective, it would have been God saying, no, in the day that you eat this fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you're going to introduce something into my system that's different than what I've provided for you. You understand what that thing is. When I call it death, you get what I'm saying. Don't do that. Those are the two views. I would hold to that young earth side. I don't think death is eternal. I don't think death was there prior to the fall. And I think we could probably all agree that death won't be there after the fall, right? So where we can land heavy on is death won't be there in eternity. I think we can all land heavy on that. That means death has an end point. There's an end point to death, and Christ is he's holding the keys to death and Hades. He's already defeated death, and he's coming again. And when he comes again to bring his kingdom, death will no longer be a thing. It makes logical sense to me. Maybe people would disagree with this. If death has an end point, that means it had a starting point. That starting point, we can see it, that it communicates of when that starting point started was with Adam's rebellion against God. So a couple passages came up on Sunday. Romans 5 was one of the passages that came up on Sunday, right? And the argument against Romans 5 was, let's see, Romans 5, verse 12 says, "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. For sin was indeed in the world before the law was given, but sin was not counted where there is no law." We look at a passage like that and we say, that just said that death spread to all men, not to all creation. And it even went as far as to say, like, sin is not counted where there is no law. That's not, like, if we take that to say, this is where we have to read it with the rest of the Bible in mind, right? Like, what's the totality of Paul's argument throughout the book of Romans? Because just back in Romans 3:23, Romans 3:23 says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Everyone. If we go back a little bit, no one's righteous, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. All have turned aside. They have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asses on their lips. So on and so on and so on, right? Like our condition because of sin, Paul is describing here like what this death looks like. Nobody pursues closeness with God anymore. It's death, right? And this death, this says, Romans 5, that sin came into the world through one man. And so when the argument is like, well, it came into the world to men, that doesn't mean that death didn't already exist. It's just that God now infected men with it. But then I have a hard time because in Romans 8, let me see if I can find it. Romans 8. It is Romans 8, verse 18. "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, that the creation itself would be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God." That verse seems to say to me that creation, not mankind, we're talking about all of creation. All of creation is like groaning under the weight of sin, under the weight of death, right? But this hope that we're waiting for, it's gonna free all of creation from the bondage of death. And that's what we see in the book of Revelation. That's what's promised. What's promised is death itself is no more. So here's how I landed where I landed. If animal kind experienced death prior to the fall, It would be a normal thing for them. Why would they be groaning under it? To me, they're groaning because this wasn't originally placed on them. And even back in Revelation, it says like in that kingdom, in God's kingdom in Revelation for eternity, like it gives these word pictures of like the lion is laying down with the lamb. Like there's no more, the hunting of each other is not happening anymore. Death doesn't exist anymore. Romans 8:28 seems to say that creation is longing for the time to be reset back to its original factory setting, if you will. And that's how we talk about the book of Revelation. We talk about it as a restoration. It's being restored. It's being restored to such a degree that it's bringing on something new. And I can hear the argument. See, there's something new that's coming. God created the first time. He created his creation with death in it, but when he does the new creation, he creates it with no death in it. And I can, I hear the argument. I'm just not convinced by it. I think if we take death, if we take death as entering through Adam, and then we listen to the scriptures when it says Christ has the keys to death and Hades, like itself, like it's not just the keys to human side of death. He has the keys to death itself. Death itself has been undone. The last enemy to be defeated is death, not the death of humans. Death itself has now been defeated. That's the hope we have in Christ. And so to me, like as we take up these positions, it does have like gospel implications, right? Like if Christ is only coming to save and redeem people's death, and we can still see like outside of God's kingdom, we could still see death happening because it's a restoration. And so we still see outside of God's kingdom, like death is still happening over there. I don't know, man. It's not, so I can see it. If we go into the presence of God right now, I believe you could see across the chasm to people, like we can see it happening, like in the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Like we could see that people are suffering over there, but that's not the description of people in the final sense. In the final sense, when we get this new heaven and new earth, all things are restored. Death becomes no more. And so when we see Jesus undoing the works of Adam, that's the good news we have, that he's not like Adam. He's not letting death exist anymore. It's done away with. There's no more need for it. I was looking up different things, and I saw a guy who was explaining both positions, and he was making good arguments, and he landed in some final places that I wanted to share with you guys. It says this, and I heard this a lot as I was listening to different people. It says the Bible never directly addresses the question of animal death before the fall, and therefore should not be a test of orthodoxy. The reason why he said that is because some people tie it to, they tie animal death to the idea of substitutionary atonement. And in substitutionary atonement, the killing of an animal takes the place of our sin. And I hear that. I don't think that for sure the Bible does not say whether or not animals died before the fall. But it's hard to make an argument from silence from the Bible. We can't draw a conclusion either way on that. You can't say, well, it doesn't say it didn't, because then you're opening up the Bible to say all kind of stuff. And this is how cults are started. And we don't want to do that. I won't do that. The Bible doesn't make that argument. So I'm not going to make an argument like that. I'm not going to say that animal death did or didn't exist before the fall. What I will do is take my logical conclusions from reading the texts and say death itself wasn't a thing before the fall. And I could point to different scriptures how Jesus rescues us from death. The last enemy to be defeated is death. Like death as an enemy, death as this thing that's conquered, death as something that's putting creation itself in subjugation. I think all of those things together, because like if you say that in Genesis 1, God calls the things he created good, but he calls death an enemy. Now he's calling an enemy good. I struggle with that, and I continue to listen to the arguments. I'm just not convinced of them, but I'm willing to hear them out. Things that we make orthodoxy, we have to consider: does this tie itself to essential doctrines of our faith? And this has the potential to, especially if you're introducing death as a thing that's just a part of God's creation, just a normal part of God's creation. Now, I don't know, man. It doesn't seem like if death is the absence of life, and God is like putting forth life, and He's calling things good, it doesn't seem like those two thoughts match up. It doesn't seem like they fit. This says both sides must admit that there's some kind of biological death before the fall. And this guy was going through, we're talking about like lower tier animals versus upper tier animals. Like, does God care if gnats die? Does he care if like microorganisms die? Like, is he talking about, because there's like the little hippopotamus looking thing that's like a microscopic thing, and it's super cute, but does God care if they die? Is this what God was talking about, that there was no death prior to the fall? And again, this comes back to a young earth, old earth thing, I think, right? Because we're talking about 6 days versus millions, perhaps billions of years. If we're talking about 6 days, then things didn't really have an opportunity to die. Or at least, like, maybe it's not 6 days, maybe it's a shorter span, because I don't know how long Adam and Eve were in the garden before the fall. The Bible is silent on that. I'm set on, the Bible says there was evening and morning, day 1, evening and morning, day 2. Like, those are set for me. Those are hard for me to move the way the Hebrew reads out. But as far as how long they were in the garden before the fall, I'd be open to hearing that was a little longer, but it was definitely not thousands upon thousands of years. It wasn't long enough for things to like be dying. And some people say, well, plants are alive. Like, look at the parable that Jesus taught. Like, a tree can't grow unless a seed dies and you plant it in the ground. And they're like, see, seeds die. And I'm like, yeah, it's drawing a comparison. Like, it's drawing to mind like it's a word picture. It's not teaching in an orthodox way that plants are alive. We saw for sure the way God communicated in Genesis 1 that the vegetation he created was different than the animals he created. The animals he created were different than the humans he created. They're different things. And he said he gave the plants and the fruit trees for food. It did not say he gave the animals for food, but that'd be another argument from silence, right? And I don't want to do that. We do see in Noah's day that there's a change post flood, that the animals were then given for food. And so it makes sense that the plants were given for food, and they're not alive in a way that animals and people are. But people make the argument that plants are alive just like animals and humans are. I don't think we can say that from the scriptures. I think that's I think that's a philosophical idea that we'll have to wrestle with. This last one, the fossil record and evidence of predators seem to indicate that the circle of life was a part of God's original creation. Man, I don't think I can land there. not with eternity in mind, because that whole circle of life thing is not a part of God's original thought for what eternity looks like. I'm gonna end it there. There's so much to that, and there's probably things that I'm forgetting, and I know that there's different arguments to be made. I do think this has impact on how we read the rest of the Bible. Just like I think the whole young earth thing has impact on how we read the rest of the Bible. Because that whole death thing is there, and we can't avoid it. And so we do have to do some work on what is meant by death. What is death? We have to do some theology, some digging out work. We have to search the scriptures to see, because the Bible, you have the introduction of death in Genesis chapter 3, and we see the effects of death all the way up until Christ. And we see the effects of death on Christ. And so I think one of the ways I could probably see people's perspective, death was in a way a part of God's original design. Like if his idea was to raise Christ up, then death would have been included. How do you die for the you plan to be on a cross for the one you love. That takes planning and introducing death, right? Like God wasn't caught off guard by death, but it was a tool to be defeated. And I don't think the way it's being described, the way I've seen people set it up. Hold on, y'all. Let me plug in my laptop real fast. Camera, my bad. The way that we see it talked about as if it was raining prior to Adam, and we saw that how death reigned from Adam to Moses. Where was that? Was that Romans 5? Yeah. Romans 5:14, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sinning was not like the transgression of Adam, who was a type of the one to come. So all the way from Adam to Moses, death was reigning, and some people probably read that verse and say, see, there were other people in the world besides Adam. God just took Adam and created a garden for him to rule in, and he told him to subdue the earth. So there had to be death out in the world, because that word subdue is like a warfare word in Hebrew. I heard that argument. Cultivate. Adam was put in the garden to cultivate it. God made a special little micro kingdom for Adam and Eve called Eden. And God is like, take the wild things and bring them under order. It doesn't have to introduce death prior to the fall. Like, I don't know. There's something about death being prior to the fall. Because it says the wages of sin is death. So sin was happening before Adam, but Jesus is he's only a type of Adam. You see what I'm saying? Like, if death was there prior, if death and sin were prior to Adam, and people were there, and they were sinning, but God blames Adam for the death of even all mankind, right? It doesn't seem like it matches up well. Why would Jesus be the second Adam? And you could say like, oh, well, yeah, there were other human beings, but they died out at the flood. And so the Bible just traces Adam's line from Adam to Noah. And at Noah, it kind of does a reset, but it doesn't say that Jesus is the second Noah. This is the second Adam. Like, Adam has to be the starting point. Adam's the starting point of humankind. He's also the starting point of where our rebellion comes from. Death enters there. It's the most clean way to read the Bible. Like, we take the easy route. It doesn't have to be complicated. We don't have to introduce what ifs. As we start introducing what ifs, we can what if the craziest things. What if the Bible was saying that actually we should handle snakes and let them see if we can survive their venom? We could what if anything. Like, this is one of those things where it goes off the rails. It can go off the rails. And so I wanted to give my thoughts. Those are just a few of my thoughts. As we get into Genesis 3, I'm sure I'll have more. I'm going to be putting out my little study guide. Hopefully it'll be useful to y'all. I hope this video is useful, just in talking as you guys talk about this passage throughout this week. What does it really mean when they rebel? What does that mean for us? What does that mean as far as our separation from God? What does that mean for our separation from each other? What does death actually do? Is death just a human invention, or does it affect all of God's creation? Romans 8 seems to indicate that it affects all of God's creation, and it seems to indicate that the starting point was Adam and Eve's rebellion. To me, it seems clean. But as I'm scouring people's thoughts, William Lane Craig was the person that I was talking about in church on Sunday, and people come up with different stuff, man. And so I don't want us to fall prey to things that take us away from the gospel, and this, to me, is one of those ways that people have departed from the gospel. Right here, right where we're at right now, is a crossroads, and you can try to say like it's not that big a deal, and I would disagree. I think we have to dive in. I don't think we could take the safe route. If we got to argue and fuss about it, so be it. We got to come to a conclusion. I want each one of us to be convinced, even if we land on opposite sides. I hope we don't land on opposite sides, obviously. But even if we land on opposite sides, at least we wrestled through it. And we're going to see God glorified in it. In whichever way that it most honors Christ, I pray that we are thoroughly set on it. So I love y'all. Hope this helps. And I don't know, maybe I'll put out another video this week. And we'll talk to you soon. All right. Peace.